Everyone. On behalf of the NYU Meyers Alumni Association, I'd like to welcome you to another Meyers Marvels event. My name is Jin Jan. I am an assistant professor at The Ohio State University and a member of the NYU Meyers Alumni Association board. NYU Rory Meyers College of Nursing is committed to producing lifelong learners who will excel in their nursing careers and be recognized as leaders who keep patient-centered care and the health of society at the forefront of their values. Meyers graduates hold positions of leadership in the profession, practicing in diverse clinical, academic, and administrative settings. The Meyers Marvels series shines a light on some of our most prominent alumni that have influenced the nursing profession. And tonight, we're thrilled to speak with Dr. Jacqueline Fawcett. Dr. Fawcett has been a nurse educator for more than 40 years. Currently, she's a professor in the Department of Nursing, College of Nursing and Health Sciences, University of Massachusetts in Boston. Previously, she held faculty positions at the University of Connecticut and the University of Pennsylvania. For more than 40 years, Dr. Fawcett's program of research have focused on Rory adaptation model-based studies of adaptation to life events. Her earlier program of research, starting with doctoral dissertation, was based on Rogers' science of unitary human beings. She's perhaps best known for her meta-theoretical work, which focuses on the nature and structure of knowledge in nursing. Dr. Fawcett's meta-theoretical work is published in many journal articles, book chapters, as well as in several of her books. And tonight, this event will be moderated by Miley Mercer. Ms. Mercer is a certified critical care nurse who has worked at New York Presbyterian primarily as an ICU nurse and in nursing leadership. Currently, she's a PhD candidate at NYU Meyers College of Nursing. And I will now turn the program over to Ms. Mercer.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for being here tonight, Dr. Fawcett. We're all delighted to hear from you. And as a PhD student, I can speak for my colleagues when I say we've spent a lot of time with your work and it's influenced us greatly already. And so I'm excited to be able to talk with you tonight. So I think we'll start off, if you can just tell us how you started your nursing career and how did you come to study nursing knowledge?
Thank you very much. Before I answer that question, I'd like to say how honored I am to be here and to see all of you and to be able to talk with you. And I'd like especially to acknowledge my very, very dear friend and colleague, John Phillips, who finished his PhD at NYU a year or two before me. We have been in contact both by email and in person and in writing for many, many, many years. And I also see that one of my now graduates from UMass Boston's PhD program in nursing is Linda Connor, who's here. She's at Ohio State, and she has her dog Charlie with her. And Charlie, I have met Charlie from time to time, and I'm delighted to see you, and of course to see everybody else. So how did I get into nursing? Well, when I was a very little girl, probably about 7 or 8 years old, I said at the dinner table one night that I wanted to be a nurse. My grandmother had been what's called a gray lady with the Red Cross, I guess probably during World War II, and I was quite taken by the idea of being able to help people. So my mother said, well, why don't you be a physician or a doctor, she said. And so then I decided, or sort of went into, so I'm going to be a physician, and studied in high school to qualify to get into pre-med, which I did at Boston University. And I decided during the first year that I really didn't want to be a physician. I really wanted to be a nurse. So I took myself over to the nursing program and I spoke to Marianne Garrigan, who was then the director of the undergraduate program. And I told her what I wanted to do. And I must have told her the story about my mother. And so she sent me off to the university psychiatrist to determine that I wasn't doing this as rebellion against mother or some such thing. Well, it was determined that I really did want to be a nurse, and the rest is history. And so I have been delighted to be a nurse. I did end up spending 5 years as a graduate because of switching my major. And at that time, Boston University had 4 years of clinical courses. So I ended up with a lot more credits than I needed because I had to spend an extra year doing actually it was the fundamentals course. So I got really interested in nursing knowledge development. I think probably when I was teaching in a small diploma program shortly after I graduated from Boston University with my baccalaureate degree. And I don't think that I thought of the work that we were doing as knowledge development or application of knowledge. But when I think back on it, that's what we were doing. And we were using some sort of an implicit conceptual framework for the curriculum. And then I started teaching at the University of Connecticut, and we got very interested in crisis theory. And we did a lot of work on curriculum development based on crisis theory. And then I decided to do my master's at NYU. Initially, I'd applied to Boston University and then decided I really wanted to go to NYU. Actually, I just wanted to be in New York. So people who choose where they go to school based on where they want to be is always has amused me. And I think I need to indicate here that other than in my undergraduate work, I have always lived away from where I went to school. So when I was at NYU, as a student, I was living in Connecticut, and my husband was teaching at the University of Connecticut, and then I was teaching at the University of Connecticut. So I took the bus to New York from Hartford for several years. And then when I started doing my master's degree at NYU, I got really interested in the whole idea of knowledge development. Then in my PhD program, I got really, really interested in, of course, with taking courses with Martha Rogers and Margaret Newman and other people there. So that's how it all happened. And then as I started teaching research courses at the University of Connecticut, I was really focused on how to conduct the research from a conceptual framework. And so the rest of it is history, and my work has been, like I have this sideline, if you will, that's become the major way of my work, is in theory development and all the things about that, meta-theoretical work. And then I also do empirical research. So
and kind of speaking to that, can you share a little bit about how you developed your version of the meta paradigm and also the impact you see that it's had on the profession?
Well, I'll start with the second question. It's a little difficult at times to determine the impact of anything, but I happened to be writing, what was I writing? Oh, I was writing an essay for my column in Nursing Science Quarterly last week. And I thought, immodestly, I ought to find out how many citations there are to my 1984 article on meta paradigm. And it turns out there were like 151 or something like that citations. And I did that because I get notices from something called ResearchGate that tells me that somebody cited some article that I've done. And I started noticing that there were a lot of citations comparatively to the 1984 article. And I thought, gee, like, I wonder how many. So that's why I did the citation index finding. And then I started thinking about, well, I have to do something that indicates where I was and where I've come from. So the essay that will come out in Nursing Science Quarterly sometime in 2003 or 2023 will be like what the original my version of the meta paradigm was and what it is now. I'm writing a blog now that's going to be traced for nursology.net. That's going to be tracing the whole history of the changes. So to answer the first part of your question, so somewhere along the line in, I guess it was in the early 80s, I happened to be looking at a book about curriculum by Torres, who had worked for the NLN and had done an analysis of the curriculum of many different baccalaureate programs and came up with the idea that the central concepts were, I think, person, society, health, and nursing. And so it was actually man, society, health, and nursing. So I thought, well, like that sounds okay. So then I was giving a paper called the What If Theory Development at an NLN conference in 1977, and the proceedings of that conference were published in 1978 and called in a little pamphlet called, I think, the What, Why, and How of Nursing Theory or something like that. And so I started actually working with a friend, colleague who's a sociologist, and I was saying, like, this is what I'm doing in this paper. And he said, well, do you really want to say man? Because it was at a time when we were beginning to be more gender neutral. So I changed man to person. And then because of the influence of Martha Rogers and all of the emphasis on the environment, I changed society to environment. So we went along with several versions of my publications, mainly in books, to say, okay, so the meta-paradigm concepts are person, environment, health, and nursing. And right from the very beginning, there was critique of the work in terms of nursing, because people said it was a tautology to have a meta-paradigm of nursing and have nursing as a concept. So I clarified that to indicate that I was really talking about the definition of nursing and nursing goals and nursing processes. So it went along like that for a while. And then Madeline Leininger was writing about the central ideas of nursing and was very interested, of course, in caring. And she critiqued the idea of person, indicating that individuals are not recognized as such in some societies. So I changed person to human beings. And I went along with that for a whole bunch of time. And then recently, I was working with colleagues from the American Academy of Nursing on a consensus paper, and we wanted a conceptual framework for the policy proposals that we were making. And we started changing things. So we started with a conceptual framework that I had invented for population health and health policy. And it ended up with ideas like the global environment and planetary health. So my most recent version, which will come out in the Nursing Science Quarterly article and in the blog, will be that the concepts are human beings, global environment, planetary health, and nursologist activities. And I have in recent years adopted the term nursology for the name of our discipline rather than nursing, because nursing, as Peggy Chin has pointed out, means slowly sipping a drink, like nursing a drink, or breastfeeding. And I don't think that that's what we really think of our discipline. And nursology, which was first identified in 1971 by Josephine Patterson in an article in Nursing Research, and she identified the word for the discipline as nursology, meaning the study of nursing. So I refer to the meta-paradigm of nursology now.
Excellent. And I think we'll all look forward to seeing those publications when they come out. And I think this is a little related to the last question, but can you tell us about your process for developing nursing knowledge?
Reading and thinking. Just reading, reading other people's work, other people's ideas, and thinking about my ideas. And a fair number of ideas come in the middle of the night, so I always keep a pad of paper next to my bed and a pen so that I can write them down, so I don't have to stay awake trying to remember them all night. But it's a lot of essentially armchair theorizing. And then, talking with other people, talking with students, feedback I get from teaching. I mean, one of the things that I notice is that people refer to the meta paradigms. They list the concepts and refer to the meta paradigms rather than the meta paradigm concepts. And then there are propositions that link the various concepts.
Excellent. That's helpful practical feedback and advice for those of us who are in school to keep the pad of paper by the bed at night. So you collaborated with Florence Downs, who is, of course, the namesake of the NYU Meyers PhD program. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you all did together?
Well, Florence was the faculty member who taught the research course in my master's program at NYU. And I had decided that whatever I was going to be, I was going to do research because I really, really liked it. So that was probably in many ways my favorite course, the most relevant course to my entire career. And then she was lured to the University of Pennsylvania by Claire Fagan, and was appointed as the Associate Dean and Director of Graduate Studies. And Claire and Florence got together and said, we have to start recruiting people for our brand new, what then was a Doctor of Nursing Science program. And so I do believe that Florence called me, or I guess we didn't have email then, so she probably called me or wrote a letter, probably called me and said, we'd like you to apply for a faculty position here. And I said, who, me? And so here I am in Connecticut, and I'm teaching at the University of Connecticut. Now I finished my PhD, and now I'm going to commute all the way from Connecticut to Philadelphia. This is something. So anyway, so I went to be interviewed, and the interview was fine. And Florence took me to lunch at the faculty club, and she pointed out all these people who are Nobel laureates. And I thought, holy cow, what am I getting myself into? But it was really, it was just a phenomenal experience. So I was teaching in the doctoral program, and I can't remember whether, I think that there were like very rough draft syllabi for the courses. So I developed the courses that were assigned to me, which were theory courses. Florence and I taught a course together on essentially programs of research, of which there were very few at the time. So there wasn't a lot for us to teach. So we talked about stuff. And now if that course were taught, of course, there's hundreds of programs of research, which just shows the growth of the scholarship in our discipline, which is wonderful. And so then at some point, Florence and I got an idea to write a book about some of the teaching I was doing on the relationship of theory and research. So that book ended up as 3 editions, and the first 2, Florence and I were co-authors. And I remember her saying to me with the first edition, I was writing this very abstract kind of stuff. And she said, Jackie, think about if you were in the classroom, what would you be saying to the students? So we made it slightly more practical, hopefully, and slightly more understandable, hopefully. So that's the kind of work that we did. Mainly, she was my associate dean, and great supporter.
Excellent. Thank you. And just shifting gears a little bit, we're in such an extraordinary moment coming out of the pandemic, and would love to hear your thoughts on where the profession is going. What should PhD students be studying now? What's on the horizon?
Well, I don't mean to be insensitive, but the pandemic hasn't affected me the way it has affected other people. I mean, we started doing remote teaching, and so I just cognitively framed this as it was like a sabbatical with teaching and meetings. And it's turned out to be very convenient for me to be at home because my husband is somewhat disabled and I can't really leave him. So this works out well for me, and I don't mind doing it this way. And I happen to have, you can see some of it. I have a really nice big study with plenty of room for my computers and all my books and articles and things like that. So it's a very convenient place, and I don't have to commute to Boston. So we live in Maine now. We moved to Maine in 1996, and the commute to Boston, I went to Philadelphia for a couple of years, and that was a really long haul from here. And Boston is much more manageable in terms of, and it was time for me to leave Penn for a lot of reasons. So it's worked out okay. And I think that as I start reading more and more papers about things that happened during the pandemic, I encourage authors and researchers to think about the pandemic as a communicable disease, so that it's not so time limited. I mean, I know that there's very unique experiences of nurses and of patients to the pandemic, but I think that if we look at it in the context of a communicable disease, then I think that people would have more of a program of research. So assuming that the pandemic ends, or at least is at a low enough level that it's more endemic than pandemic, that I think that would be better. Otherwise, I think that I would strongly advise doctoral students and anybody to do the research on the topics for which you have passion. I mean, my master's was in parent-child nursing, and I've always been interested in childbearing and the childbearing phase of life. And so my research focused on that, and I ended up with a major program of research in functional status and normal life events and serious illness, which has morphed into adaptation to life events. And I happen to use, I've been using the Roy adaptation model for probably about 40 years, 35, no, actually close to 40 years as the guide for that research. I sort of fell into it from being asked to write a chapter about fathers' experiences of cesarean birth, and the companion chapter on mother's experiences is going to be using the Roy adaptation model. So I said, well, as much as I love Martha Rogers and the science of unitary human beings, and I had a whole program of research going, and that with that conceptual framework, I better switch. And it turned out that this was a very productive and fundable type of research. I think if I continued with the Rogerian research, I would have gotten funding as well, but it just was I was pleased with the way we were going, and it worked out well. But my heart has always been with Rogerian science, and so when I go to the Society of Rogerian Society conferences, I feel like I'm home. Or when I come to NYU and come to the Meyers College, I feel like I'm home.
Great. That's really helpful perspective. And kind of jumping off from there, our last question is, for our PhD students and the recent PhD alumni, what pearls of wisdom would you like to share based on your incredible career?
Well, write all the time. First thing that you do is write one or more articles from your dissertation. If you have an opportunity to publish during your doctoral studies, do that. But write all the time. I mean, right now I'm an interim department chair and I don't have as much time to write, but a really good day is even if I write a couple sentences from a paper I'm working on, and I have a long list of ideas for papers that may outlast my lifetime. I hope not. I hope I get them all done, but it's just write all the time and look for funding, because that's the way that you can more easily do your search. But think about what to do when you're waiting to get funding. So have a second line of scholarly work, such as I've mentioned, that I have this one line of my scholarship is in meta theory, and then the other is in the empirical research. So if you have two different lines of scholarship, and one doesn't depend on data and all the things that are involved in conducting research, then you can write all the time with that. The other thing is Florence Downs taught me, and I guess a lot of us, that one way to get started on a paper is to start with your abstract and write a paragraph for every sentence in the abstract. And when I've done that, it works. The paper's practically written.
That's really great advice. Thank you so much. So we will open up to questions from the group. Please type your questions into the chat and we will get to as many as possible. We'll wait for a couple of questions to come in.
And of course, I'm seeing Eileen, and Sarah Pasternak is joins me as a colleague on the board of the Nursing Archives Associates at Boston University. And Marianne Roncoli was a housemate of mine when we were at Penn. We had a house with a bunch of us who were commuters, so it's great to see views. And if there's other people who I know and I don't see you, I apologize.
Jackie, thank you so much for doing this. It's a thrill. Many of the people on the Zoom today don't know that I was a PhD student of yours and at Penn, and I hearken back to not only your excellent ability to help us blend epistemology with the empiricism. And every day, or at least every week, something from you I use, even to this day, even to help me, think through this issue as a dean or as president of the academy. It's always about framing it. And I was just at a wonderful meeting at the University of Miami in health education. And I sat there and said, next to Stephanie Ferguson, it's about person, environment, health and nursing. And of course, I'll update that now, but it's very present, and we're delighted that you're able to be with us today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I'm really honored, Eileen. My goodness, I didn't realize that the work had that much impact.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have a question in the chat. So the first question is, do you have any insight on how situation-specific theories can be developed into middle-range theories?
Yes, actually, I wrote a chapter in the Emin Malise book on situation-specific theories about just that topic. If you're doing situation-specific theories are about a specific health condition with a specific population. So for example, it occurred to me that our research in functional status during childbearing is really a situation-specific theory. And we looked at like low-risk pregnancy, and then we looked at high-risk pregnancy, and we looked at mothers, and we looked at fathers, and we looked at partners of women, and so on. So if you have a bunch of middle-range theories about the same topic, but you have perhaps different situations and different health conditions, perhaps, and different populations, then it could be developed into a middle-range theory. So all of our work in different health conditions on functional status would end up with what we're calling now, adaptation to life events as a middle-range theory, because there's been not only childbearing populations, but also parents of children in a body cast, people who've had myocardial infarctions, and people with cancer, and so on. So in other words, a bunch of related situation-specific theories can be then induced into a middle-range theory.
Excellent, thank you. I think we have another couple of questions coming into the chat. And anyone, we have another one. Dr. Fawcett, it is such an honor to be here and hear you talk. I am a PhD student commuting from Madison, Connecticut to NYU. Do you have any advice on how to survive?
Have a routine. If you can, if you're staying in New York for any time, have a place where you can leave clothes and toiletries and makeup and things like that. I mean, I've always, when I commuted, even when I was a student, I had a place. I stayed with friends mostly. I guess all the time I stayed with friends and classmates. And I had, like, even if it was a little drawer in a dresser or a little cubby hole, I had a place where I had all my things. And so then when I grew up and I went to Penn, and I rented a room, and then I eventually had a condo. So I always had some of my clothing there, and I have a set of all the stuff that you need to get going in the morning and things like that, and and cooking equipment and things like that. So and then when I went to Boston, I moved some of that and I had furniture by that time and all those things. But if you don't have to cart a lot of stuff, and now you don't have to cart books very much. You don't have to cart papers. And so you can just go with a lightweight computer, and it's much easier than dragging around the stuff that like I had to drag around. I got muscles. And I think then finding a way to commute that you can work while you're commuting. So I always took the bus. I had to drive about, I guess it was about maybe 35 or 40 minutes from where we lived in Storrs to Hartford to get the bus. But then I was on the bus and I worked. I read, I took notes, and it was before computers, so it was a lot of writing stuff out, and writing in the margins of things and editing, and sometimes actually writing parts of a paper. When I started going to Penn and then to Boston, I fly, and so I can work when I'm flying. I've gotten to the point now that I don't work very much when I'm commuting. I read my Kindle, read murder mysteries.
That's important too, to take time for fun reading. Not that academic reading isn't fun, just different. Well, that's really helpful advice. I think so many of us have had the experience of commuting for various parts of our academic careers. Just waiting on a few more questions to come in. We have another one. This is from a first-year PhD student. It says, "Hello, Dr. Fawcett. I am a first-year PhD student, and we talked a lot about you in our theory class. In a chapter you published on the hallmark of 21st century nursing, a prediction, you shared a pessimistic view on nursing advancement. Do you still feel pessimistic?"
Some days. And optimistic other days. And the pessimism is that there's not enough attention to the knowledge of the discipline and too much emphasis on the doing of the discipline. So students focus, no matter how much we emphasize thinking, they focus on the checklist of skills. And I think that this movement toward so-called competency-based education is making that worse from my perspective. I mean, for me, competency-based education is what we've been doing all along, because we've always been looking at outcomes. So it's just got a new name. And this is like when I presented the Watt of theory development at that NLN conference in around 1977. Dorothy Johnson was also one of the speakers, and she said essentially to me, "So what's new?" in what I was saying. And she was right. When you look back into the history of the discipline, people have been saying these things all along. So I'm not that that optimistic that things are going to go toward thinking about what we're doing and being true knowledge workers. And I think that the pandemic gave us an opportunity to showcase what we can do in practice, but what we can do in practice. And it wasn't emphasized on what we know that drove what we do. And that's what worries me. I'm slightly encouraged by the inclusion as the very first domain in the new AAC and Essentials as the knowledge domain, but I'm not sure what people are going to do about that. I mean, once upon a time in 1975 or thereabouts, when the NLN was the only accrediting agency for nursing programs, there was a criterion that the curriculum be based on a conceptual framework or conceptual model. And the mistake I think that was made was that the NLN didn't offer workshops on how to do that. And so most faculties didn't really know how to do that. and they struggled on. And then eventually there was a lot of pressure to take that criterion out, and they did. And so we didn't make any real progress. And I mean, I was a brand new graduate in, like a year out of school in 1965 when the ANA issued the paper about, everybody for professional practice should have a baccalaureate degree, and here we are. With not anywhere near that. And the Future of Nursing report came out just a few years ago, and we're still not very far into having everybody. I mean, I think that what makes most sense to me from what you know in terms of then how you practice is that the doctor of nursing practice should be the entry into practice. And it's very embarrassing to me. So when my husband needed some physical therapy, and he had home health physical therapy, the therapist had her entry into physical therapy was a doctor of physical therapy. And the visiting nurse who came had an associate degree and had no interest in even a baccalaureate degree. So that's, that's the pessimistic part of me. The optimistic part is all of you and what you can do. And if you're determined to use your education and become an established scholar, then things will be better. And we will survive. Otherwise, I think we will not survive.
Thank you. We have a couple of other questions. So we have one from Marianne Roncalli. Hello, thank you for remembering me. Could you cite how you framed the father's reaction to childbirth?
Yes,
What
well,
we thought of, what we thought of as the Couvade syndrome using nursing science. It was an aha experience for me.
Well, it must have been when I was in my master's program studying with Mary Jiffer that I, for some reason, got interested in father's experiences of the woman's pregnancy and learned about Couvade, which was in the anthropology literature. And I went to probably the Metropolitan. I went to one of the big museums in New York City and found the now I can't remember what it was called, but there was the Human Relations Areas files, and they had all this information about Couvade in that. And I sat there in this fabulous building and took lots and lots of notes. And so that was the beginning of understanding that men had experiences of the pregnancy that were, the Couvade is like, men have cravings and other things that are very similar to the common symptoms of pregnancy. And then it went from there, and I got interested, and then that chapter I had to write, or I was invited to write, had to do with cesarean birth. So I was interested in the father's experience of the cesarean birth. And so we wrote about that. And then I continued looking at things in my dissertation. I was before that chapter, I was very interested in both the husband's and the wife's body image. And I did a study of perceived body space and body image during pregnancy and the postpartum, and was interested in both the women and the men.
Excellent. So we have another question from Hillary Dutton. It says, as a nurse educator who works with new graduate nurses, could you share more about how you recommend helping novice nurses develop resilience, coping skills, and clinical reasoning skills as they transition to practice in a post-pandemic environment?
Well, I think that every new nurse, every new graduate of whatever the entry program is, should have an internship or a residency. And so all of those things in terms of the transition would be done in a more, I don't know if slow is the right word, but in a more protected environment. So you're not thrown into, the middle of things and you're overwhelmed by things right away. And I think resilience is just how you manage things and helping people to manage things in a somewhat manageable way, helping them, giving people concrete suggestions for how to take care of self, making time for self. I mean, I was until very recently of the mind that and I would tell my students that, as my students know, that there's 7 days a week and that you work 7 days a week on your scholarly work. So recently I've gotten a little bit smarter about but I always exercised during that time. So that I did other things to take care of myself, and I always ate well. I learned how to cook using Julia Child's Mastering the Art of French Cooking. So I learned how to cook reasonably well, at least, and enjoyed that very much. And so that became a big part of like self-care. And when I was a student, I must have had a Friday class, and I would go home after having shopped in the village and at one of the real nice grocery stores there, and go home with my shopping bags full of food that we were going to have for the weekend. I had a dinner party almost every month, and that was really took me away from all of the thinking about school or whatever else I was doing, and I continued that after I graduated. So take care of yourself, and I think that gives you the kind of energy that you need to be resilient.
Excellent.
And to be in touch with your feelings and talk to people when it becomes overwhelming. I mean, this morning I was really tired, and I wake up in the night these days, and I can't always go back to sleep right away. So of course I look at my email, so I get a head start on the day. And there was just some stuff that had come in later yesterday that I was responding to. And it was like, oh no, not more work to do. And I was asking somebody to do something, and she was pushing back at me like, no, you do it. And it ended up she did what I asked her to do. But I just felt overwhelmed. I was tired and I was overwhelmed. And I said to my husband, I just can't manage this day. I've got Zooms all day. I've got a bunch of papers I have to work on. And, and then I felt better after I said it. I got over feeling sorry for myself. But I think it's important to talk out how you feel.
Absolutely. It looks like we have time for one more question. And the next question on the list is, some students have wondered if theory has been de-emphasized at some schools and have asked about the value of teaching about nursing theory. What is the best approach to this question?
Well, I don't know why you would talk about method without theory. So, I mean, that is true that some schools have eliminated theory courses. A lot of schools have, and it's practically absent in any explicit way in undergraduate programs, in many undergraduate programs. But it's always there, and I think the faculty have to become aware of that. And you, who are the next generation of faculty, have to make sure that this happens. And I do think that having the knowledge domain in the AAC and Essentials will be somewhat helpful. And Peggy Chin and Marlene Smith and I think Leslie Nickel did a fabulous toolkit for that domain that will help people and really help them to do that kind of work. But it has to be connected to everything else. But it has to be emphasized. And I think if you simply think that you can't do anything without theory. I mean, I wrote a blog about the impossibility of thinking atheoretically. People say, I'm not using a theory. It's impossible to think without some sort of theory. You have some frame of reference. Karl Popper, the philosopher of science, says you have to have a horizon of expectation.
Well, thank you so much. I think we are at 6:45, and it has been just thrilling to have you here, Dr. Fawcett. And I'll turn it back to Dr. Jean to close this out.
Thank you very much, Molly.
Even after all this time, I still can't find the unmute button sometimes. Well, that was amazing. And on behalf of the NYU Alumni Board, we thank you for your attendance tonight and have a good evening.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a true honor for me. I'm just delighted. Thank you.